I wanted to spend this video talking about things that don't work and why. One of the interesting things about being trained to deal with post-traumatic stress disorders was not only learning to understand the impact of hypervigilism or hypervigilance and how it impacts the trauma that it creates for the body, but also how we would try, especially with the soldiers returning from combat and deployment, how we would try to help them, but it wouldn't work. And I want to bring this to you because there's a really interesting analogy that can help us identify things that, well, won't work for us because it didn't work for them. One of the things that happened when folks would return from deployment and they would be struggling with hypervigilance and the post-traumatic stress disorder that was caused by it was that we would try to offer them medication, because a lot of times people would be stuck in kind of a manic phase. That hypervigilance would take them up really high. They would stay in that ever-ready alertness, or they would crash and they couldn't come back up. They would experience a very profound depression, a sense of disconnectedness and disassociativeness. And so one of the things that oftentimes people do in dealing with things like this is we have medications for manic behavior. We have medications for depression. But what would happen when they gave them to the soldiers dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder is that it would impede the body's natural ability to heal, because it would provide medication that was meant for a chronic condition, where post-traumatic stress was oftentimes an episodic event. In other words, it wasn't manifest all the time. They weren't manic all the time. They weren't depressed all the time, but they would experience these ranges and they would try to medicate them. And basically they would keep their bodies from healing themselves. And this is the most important of resilience. We have the natural ability to heal from traumatic events or from continuous trauma that comes from hypervigilance. We have that ability to heal within us. The grounding, the breathing, the titration, those are all meant to open up the body's natural ability to heal itself. That's all it is. Second thing that would happen with soldiers is that our basic form of therapy that we offer to people dealing with anxiety or depression is talk therapy. We'd bring them in and we'd talk to them. We'd say, tell us what happened. What's going on? When did you begin to feel this way? Was there an event or something where this impacted you? And what they found with the soldiers, and I'm laughing because it's sad. It's a sad, but anyway, that talking about it didn't help because it just simply triggered the anxieties again. And that, different from a significant event that you can't identify, the soldiers knew what was there and what was bothering them. And by simply hashing it out or talking it out again, it caused more stress and it had a negative impact. Now, I bring this up because right now the chances are pretty good that people will be coping with high levels of stress from hypervigilance through self-medication, through activities that we would normally do to reduce stress. And there's lots of ways to do it. And oftentimes, and they're more hyperbolic forms, they take the forms of addictions or dependencies and so on. And I say this because this is one of those moments where you have to be very mindful, because you're not coping with a little bit of stress. You're coping with a lot. And self-medication can become exceptionally dangerous at this time. In the same way, leaving the television on all the time, reading every article, looking at every news feed will increase your level of stress. bury your head in the sand, avoid everything. No. Moderation is the key. Simply going over the same story again and again, that's going to increase your level of anxiety. It will not help it at all. Hence, read something else. Look at something else. Be mindful of the conversations that you have with people, and don't ignore what's happening, but intentionally seek out conversations that aren't about what's happening, and realize that's an important piece of dealing with the stress that you're feeling. It goes back to the titration. You need the great joyful piece and the stress and the indifference in between. You need all three. And if you are watching the television all day and watching the news feeds and watching the stories and watching the numbers, you are damaging your ability to cope with this. It's not that you have to ignore it, it's you have to moderate it.